My name is Dale. If you're watching this, it probably means you've been in a place where your loyalty was treated like a liability and your experience was seen as a threat. Maybe you're there right now. Stick with me, 'cause this story is for you. I want you to know what you're worth and what happens when a company forgets. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if any of this sounds familiar. It started, as these things often do, in a conference room that was all glass and condescension. They called it the Clarity Room. Ironic, given how opaque everything at Omnicorp had become. For 25 years, I'd been the head of client strategy and production at a company once called Gable Press. We were artisans of the printed page, the kind of place luxury brands came to when they needed a catalog that felt more like a gallery book, or an invitation that felt like an event in itself. I knew the specific GSM weight of paper that felt like old money in a client's hand. I knew which Swiss ink supplier had the only black that didn't flatten under showroom lights. I had built the company's reputation alongside its founder, a man named Arthur Gable, one handshake and one flawlessly executed print run at a time. Then Arthur retired, cashed out, and Omnicorp swooped in. They were a private equity firm with a portfolio of what they called legacy businesses, which was their term for companies they could strip for parts. They kept the name for a year, then rebranded us as Omnicorp Print Solutions. The soul had already been auctioned off. The name was just the last piece of furniture to go. The man sitting across from me, in a suit that cost more than my first car, was Trent. He was the new vice president of sales, 32 years old, with an MBA from a school that taught you how to evaluate a company, but not what gives it value. His hair was a work of aggressive styling, and he had the kind of unnervingly white teeth that suggested a life without coffee or consequences. He slid a thin folder across the polished table. It made a dry, whispery sound, the sound of professional death. He said, "We're moving in a new strategic direction, Dale, streamlining our human capital assets to maximize Q4 profitability." Human capital assets. He was talking about me. He was talking about the people I'd hired and mentored for decades. I just looked at him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside, a cold, heavy dread was pooling in my stomach, but on the outside I was a statue. I learned long ago in negotiations that the first person to speak after the offer is made loses. This felt no different. He continued, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "It's a question of cultural fit. We're building a more agile, a more hungry sales force, a team of closers, ninjas." Ninjas, he actually said ninjas. I'd heard him use the term before in sales meetings, referring to the pack of loud, back-slapping young men he'd brought in from his last company. They moved through the office like a conquering army, all loud phone calls and cologne, treating our female account managers like waitstaff and our meticulous production process like a quaint, slow-moving obstacle to their commissions. This was the bro culture I'd flagged to HR. I'd sent emails, citing specific incidents, one of Trent's ninjas telling our lead designer her opinion on a layout wasn't needed because she made things pretty while he made things profitable, another cornering a junior project manager, asking her if she was on the menu for the client dinner. I had documented it all professionally and calmly in a report that HR had acknowledged with a sterile automated email and then buried. I had tried to protect the culture Arthur Gable had built. Trent saw it as an attack on his authority. My pushback wasn't about feelings, it was about the bottom line. Our clients, brands like Cartier and Rolls-Royce, didn't buy from us because of hungry ninjas. They bought from us because we understood the subtle language of luxury, which is built on respect, precision, and an almost fanatical attention to detail. The culture Trent was building was the antithesis of that. It was loud, careless, and cheap. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. Trent was still talking. He was using words like synergy and right-sizing. It was a corporate eulogy, delivered by someone who had no idea what was dying. So he finally said, leaning back with an air of finality, "Today will be your last day." I nodded slowly. I looked past him, through the glass wall, to the sales floor. I could see two of his guys high-fiving. They weren't even trying to hide it. The whole thing had been a performance. My firing was the closing act. I said, "I understand." My voice was even. It seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He was prepared for a fight, for yelling, for a man to break down. He wasn't prepared for quiet acceptance. He blinked, the rhythm of his corporate spiel broken. HR has your severance package ready, he said, recovering. It's generous. Standard non-compete, of course. 2 years. You know how it is. I did know. I also knew that in our state a non-compete that broad was almost certainly unenforceable, a scare tactic they used to keep people sidelined. It was one of the many things Trent, in his MBA-fueled brilliance, didn't seem to grasp about the real world. A security guard I'd known for 15 years, a good man named George, appeared at the door. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just held a cardboard box. It was the final humiliating prop in their little play. I stood up, my joints feeling stiff and old. I walked past Trent without another word and followed George to my office. The office that had been Arthur Gable's before me. The one with the wide oak desk and the view of the city. My awards were on the wall. My photos. My life. George stood awkwardly in the doorway as I began to fill the box. I took the photos of my family. I took the small hand-bound leather notebook I kept my personal thoughts in. I left the awards. They belonged to a company that no longer existed. As I walked through the office, the ninjas went silent. They watched me, their faces a mixture of smug triumph and adolescent curiosity. They were watching a dinosaur being led to extinction. They couldn't possibly understand that the dinosaur was the one who knew where all the water was. I didn't look at any of them, I just kept my eyes on the elevator bank. My last act of defiance was my dignity. I wouldn't let them see the tremor in my hands. I wouldn't let them see the sting behind my eyes. I got in the elevator, the doors closed, and for the first time in 25 years I went down instead of up. The drive home was a blur. The city I knew, the streets I'd driven every day for a quarter of a century felt alien. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. The cardboard box sat on the passenger seat, a pathetic monument to a lifetime of work. The silence in the car was immense. It was the sound of my professional identity being erased. Finally, I got out and walked into my empty house. My wife was out of town visiting her mother. The quiet was a physical presence. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter unnaturally loud. I carried the box not to my home office, but down to the basement. I have a workshop down there. It's my sanctuary. It smells of wood, leather, and glue. For years I've practiced bookbinding. It's a hobby that requires patience, precision, and a respect for the materials, everything my job used to be about. I placed the box on my workbench, next to a half-finished copy of Moby Dick I was rebinding in dark blue goatskin. I ran my hand over the smooth leather. It was real. It was solid, unlike the world I had just left. I didn't feel anger then, not yet. What I felt was a profound sense of foolishness, a deep, hollowing shame. I had been a company man. I believed in loyalty. I believed that if you did the work, kept your head down, and produced results, you would be valued. I believed that competence was its own shield. It's a comforting lie we tell ourselves, a story to make the compromises and the long hours feel like an investment rather than a sacrifice. I had seen the signs. I had seen the culture shifting for the past 2 years, ever since Omnicorp took over. It was a slow rot, like damp in the walls of a grand old house. I thought back to the town halls, Trent up on stage pacing back and forth with a headset microphone like he was giving a TED Talk. He used phrases like disrupting the print paradigm and leveraging synergies. He never once mentioned quality. He never once mentioned craft. He talked about sales quotas and client acquisition costs. To him, our clients weren't partners we collaborated with. They were targets to be captured. He was an asset stripper of culture, and I had been naive enough to think I could stop him from the inside. My mind drifted to Sarah. She was a brilliant project manager I'd hired right out of college. She had an incredible eye for color and a mind for logistics that was second to none. She was the future of the company, the kind of talent you build a dynasty around. 6 months ago, she'd quit. She came into my office, her resignation letter trembling in her hand, and told me she couldn't take it anymore. One of Trent's top guys, a slick-haired predator named Kyle, had made it his personal mission to undermine her. He'd accidentally leave her off crucial emails, then blame her for not being up to speed. He'd pitch her ideas as his own in client meetings. The final straw was when he'd told a client right in front of her, "Don't worry, I'll have Dale's girl handle the boring stuff." I had gone to war for her. I went straight to the head of HR, a woman who looked permanently exhausted, and laid it all out. I had emails, I had a timeline, I had a rock-solid case. She listened, nodded, and said she would initiate a review. Nothing happened. Kyle got a bonus the next month for record-high client engagement. Sarah walked away from a job she loved because the culture had become a daily assault on her dignity. I had tried to convince her to stay, promised I would protect her. Looking back now, in the sterile quiet of my basement, I realized how arrogant that was. I couldn't even protect myself. My failure to save her felt more acute now than my own firing. Her departure wasn't just a loss of talent, it was a moral indictment of the place, and I had stayed. I had rationalized it. I told myself I was staying to fight for the good people who remained, for the legacy of Arthur Gable. But was it loyalty, or was it fear? Fear of the unknown, fear of starting over at 58. That was the low point. The moment the shame curdled into something else. Something cold and hard. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about Sarah. It was about George, the security guard who couldn't look me in the eye. It was about my old mentor, Arthur, whose name was now attached to a toxic swamp. The lie I'd been telling myself that my quiet competence was a form of resistance shattered. My silence hadn't been a shield, it had been a form of complicity. I stood there for a long time, the smell of the leather, the clean lines of my tools, the patient weight of the books waiting to be repaired. This was a world of order, of cause and effect. A world where quality was the only thing that mattered. The world upstairs, the one that had just chewed me up and spat me out, was a world of chaos disguised as strategy. They thought process was a substitute for people. They were about to learn that a process is only as good as the people who believe in it. And that's when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a picture of my sister, Clara. She's 3 years younger than me, but in many ways she's always been the one looking out for me. While I was building a career inside a single company, she was building one by taking on the world. She's a senior investigative reporter, the kind with a Pulitzer on her mantelpiece and a Rolodex that could topple governments. I almost didn't answer. I didn't want her to hear the defeat in my voice, but I did. "Hey Dale," she said. Her voice was warm, instantly cutting through the chill in the room. "Just calling to see how you are. How's the world of high-end paper and ink?" I took a deep breath. The moment of truth. I could lie, I could say fine and change the subject, or I could tell the truth. "They fired me," I said. My voice was a croak. I cleared my throat. "They fired me this morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pause of shock. It was the sound of a professional mind shifting gears. It was the sound of a hunter hearing a twig snap in the forest. "Tell me everything," she said. And so I did. Right there, standing in my basement workshop, I started to unpack the last 2 years. The story poured out of me, not as a complaint, but as a deposition. I told her about Trent, about his ninjas, about the toxic culture of misogyny and bullying. I told her about Sarah. I told her about the HR complaints that went nowhere. I told her about the corner cutting, the cheap materials they were starting to substitute on major jobs, hoping the clients wouldn't notice. I told her about the LVMH holiday catalog, a 7-figure job where they were planning to use a cheaper, off-brand German paper instead of the custom-milled Italian stock we'd specified in the contract, a detail that could get them sued and blacklisted. It wasn't just a toxic workplace, it was systemic fraud, wrapped in a flag of efficiency. When I finally finished, the silence on the line was different. It was charged. "Do you have proof?" Clara asked. Her voice was quiet, precise. I looked around my workshop. My eyes landed on my main computer, a secure offline machine I used for my personal projects. For my entire career, I have been meticulous. I'm a man who believes in process, in documentation. It's how you ensure quality. It's how you build things that last. Over the years, I had built a system, a digital black book, as I called it. It wasn't a collection of dirt, it was my life's work, a parallel private archive of my professional knowledge. Every custom ink formula, every unique paper supplier, every handshake deal, every client's specific unstated preference, the kind of institutional knowledge that is the true bedrock of a company like ours. It was all stored on an encrypted drive, a habit I'd started years ago after a server crash nearly wiped out a decade of work. But in the last 2 years, I had started adding other things. I hadn't done it with any grand plan in mind. It was more like a compulsion, a need to document the madness. Every time I sent a formal complaint to HR, I saved a copy. Every time a colleague came to me in confidence about being harassed, I made a dated, anonymous note of the conversation. I had printouts of the original LVMH contract, with the paper stock specified, and the new internal production order from Trent's team, with the cheaper substitute clearly listed, and the recordings. After the third or fourth time Trent had made a promise in a meeting and then denied it a week later, I started carrying a small digital voice recorder in my pocket. My state is a one-party consent state. I'd checked. I had hours of audio from meetings. Trent bragging about how he'd handled the HR complaints, Kyle joking about Sarah, the entire bro culture in their own words. I didn't collect it for revenge. I collected it because I felt like I was losing my mind and I needed proof that the world I was living in was real. I was a craftsman and my tool was documentation. I looked at the secure hard drive sitting next to my monitor. It was my professional soul, my memory, and now it was my weapon. I have everything, I told my sister. Her voice on the other end was cold, clear, and focused. It was the voice that had brought down senators and CEOs. "Good," she said. "Don't talk to anyone else. Don't sign anything. I'm booking a flight." The resolve that had been hardening in my gut finally set. This wasn't a breakdown anymore. This was the beginning of a plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was colder. This was a plan for justice. It was a plan to restore a world of cause and effect. They had made a calculated business decision. Now I would make one of my own. The next 2 days were a blur of quiet, methodical work. Clara arrived and my house transformed from a place of defeat into a war room. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of journalistic integrity and righteous fury. We sat at my large dining room table, spreading out years of documents like a battle map. I had my encrypted drive and we went through it, file by file. She listened with an unnerving stillness, her pen scratching notes on a long legal pad. "This isn't just a story about a toxic workplace, Dale," she said after hours of review. "That's the color. The real story, the one that the board and the stockholders will care about, is the financial risk. This isn't just boys being boys. This is systemic incompetence threatening the company's core asset, its reputation." She was right. The bro culture wasn't just a human resources problem, it was a business model problem. Trent's philosophy was to churn and burn both clients and employees. He prioritized volume over value, quick wins over long-term relationships. In a business built on legacy and trust, it was like trying to win the marathon by sprinting the first 100 yards. You just burn out. My foresight, as Clara called it, wasn't born of suspicion, but of diligence. My digital black book was the perfect example. I started it 15 years ago. The company's official servers were a mess. A patchwork of old systems. Omnicorp refused to invest in upgrading. Finding a specific detail from a job 5 years prior could take half a day. So, I built my own archive. It was a custom database I designed myself, cross-referencing every project by client, date, materials used, press settings, and contact person. It even had notes on the clients themselves, their birthdays, their kids' names, their favorite brand of scotch. It was the human element of business, the part that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. Omnicorp's management knew it existed, but they saw it as Dale's little hobby. They had no idea it was the true operational brain of the entire client-facing side of the company. They had the building, but I had the blueprints. As Clara and I worked, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Marcus, my former head of production. He was a man of few words and immense skill, someone I had hired 20 years ago. The text read, "Chaos here. Trent is trying to find the specs for the new Chanel lookbook. The client is asking for the proof and he can't find the color calibration profile. He thinks it's on the main server. You and I know it isn't." I showed the text to Clara. She smiled grimly. The color calibration profile for the Chanel account was a perfect example of my black book. It wasn't just a set of numbers. It was a proprietary process I had developed with Chanel's creative director over a decade. It was designed to replicate the specific subtle warmth of their flagship store's lighting on a printed page. It existed in exactly two places, my encrypted hard drive and the backup I had given to Chanel's team in Paris. It had never been on Omnicorp's server because their IT security was a joke, and I wouldn't risk a client's proprietary data. Trent was searching for a key that had never been in the building. Marcus was my first ally, my insider. He was loyal to the craft, not to the corporate logo. I texted him back, "Stay safe, document everything." Clara started making calls. She had a list of names I had given her, other victims of Trent's regime, former employees like Sarah, current employees who were too scared to speak up. She didn't press them. She simply introduced herself, stated the facts as she knew them, and offered them a chance to tell their side of the story, anonymously and protected by the full weight of her newspaper's legal team. One by one, they started talking. The dam of fear began to crack. We also spoke to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Clara recommended. She looked over my severance agreement and laughed. "This non-compete is a work of fiction, Dale," she said. "It's wildly overbroad, and this clause about non-disparagement, given that they seem to be actively trying to ruin your reputation, I think we can argue they breached it first. Sign nothing." The next phase of the plan began. While Clara built her story, I started laying the foundations for my next move. I wasn't going to retire. I wasn't going to fade away. I was a builder. So I started building. I filed the paperwork for a new consulting firm. I chose the name carefully. I called it Gable Press Strategies. It was a nod to Arthur, a reclamation of the legacy that Omnicorp had tried to bury. Then, the first shot from their side, not a phone call, but an email. A carefully worded, vaguely threatening message from Omnicorp's PR department to a few industry trade publications, announcing my departure to pursue other opportunities and hinting that the company was excited to move forward with a more dynamic, results-oriented team. It was a classic corporate hit job, designed to paint me as old-fashioned and obsolete. They were trying to control the narrative. They had no idea the narrative was a tidal wave about to break over their heads. The day before Clara's story was set to run, I made a few quiet calls of my own. Not to clients, not yet. I called two of my oldest suppliers. One was a family-owned paper mill in northern Italy that produced the custom stock for many of our luxury clients. The other was the Swiss ink manufacturer. I had known the owners for decades. We didn't just talk business, we talked about our families, about wine, about life. I told them I was starting my own consulting firm. I didn't ask them for anything. I just told them my new company's name and wished them well. They were both shocked to hear I'd been fired. The Italian patriarch, a man named Signor Rossi, said, "Dale, that company is nothing without you. You are the reason we have been so loyal. Omnicorp, they haggle over pennies. You understand that quality is an investment. You let us know what you need. Our door is always open to you." It wasn't a contract. It was something stronger. It was trust. Trent could send his ninjas to try and negotiate with these people, but they wouldn't get anywhere. They didn't speak the language, not the language of Italian or German, but the language of respect. That evening, Clara and I sat in my living room. Her work was done. The story was filed. It was scheduled to be on the front page of the digital edition at 5 a.m. the next morning. "Are you ready for this?" she asked me. I thought about the last 25 years, the pride, the hard work, the slow creeping rot, the final humiliation. I thought about Sarah and Marcus and Arthur Gable. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time to turn on the lights and see what scurries away." We didn't stay up to wait. We didn't need to. The world would wake up to a new reality. My quiet life was about to become very loud, but it wasn't my voice they would hear. It was the sound of a carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of the truth. It was the sound of an empire of arrogance beginning to fall. I woke up at 4:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the story was supposed to drop. I didn't need an alarm. A strange calm had settled over me. It was the feeling you get when you've done everything you can, and the outcome is now in the hands of gravity. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in a world that was about to shift on its axis. At 5:01 a.m., my laptop pinged with a notification from the New York Times app. The headline was stark, brutal, and beautiful: "The rot at the core of Omnicorp." Clara hadn't just written a story about a disgruntled employee, she had woven a tapestry of systemic failure. She started with the bro culture, using anonymous quotes from Sarah and a half-dozen other women to paint a vivid picture of the toxic environment. But she didn't leave it there. She pivoted, just as she'd planned, to the financial implications. She detailed the corner cutting, specifically mentioning the LVMH catalog and the plan to use inferior paper. She had a quote from an independent paper expert who confirmed that the substitution would be a catastrophic breach of quality and trust. She had quotes from corporate governance experts who questioned the board's oversight. And she had my recordings. She didn't use the audio, but she quoted it. Trent's own words, bragging about ignoring HR. Kyle's jokes. It was all there, laid out in the undeniable black and white of the country's most respected newspaper. The story was a masterclass in corporate dissection. It wasn't about me, Dale, the victim. It was about Omnicorp, the failing institution. My personal story was simply the lens through which the public could see the rot. For the first hour there was silence, the quiet before the shockwave hits. I sat at my dining room table, sipping my coffee, my phone face down on the wood. Then at 6:15 a.m., it began to vibrate. It was a text from Marcus, a picture of the sales floor. It was mostly empty, but in the center of the room on the giant screen that usually showed sales leaderboards, someone had put up the New York Times article. The headline was visible from across the room. The text below the picture said, "They know." A few minutes later, the PR campaign against me began to backfire spectacularly. Anonymous comments had been appearing for days on industry forums, painting me as a bitter, washed-up executive. Now, links to Clara's article started appearing in the replies. The narrative they had tried to control was being ripped from their hands in real time. My phone began to buzz again, this time with emails and LinkedIn requests. They were from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old colleagues, former clients. The subject lines were all some variation of, "I just read the story, I'm so sorry, I'm not surprised." The first direct move came not from a client, but from Omnicorp's lawyers. An email landed in my inbox at 7:30 a.m. It was a cease and desist letter, full of blustering threats about my non-disparagement clause and tortious interference. It was a panicked, clumsy reaction. I forwarded it to my lawyer and Clara without a word. My lawyer replied within minutes, "Let the frantic animal thrash. They have nothing." The real blow, the one that I knew would change the game, came at 9:02 a.m. just after the stock market opened. It was a phone call from a number I knew by heart. It was Jean-Luc, the CEO of a world-renowned Swiss watchmaker, one of our oldest and most profitable clients. His account was personally worth millions in annual revenue. I had managed his company's business for 15 years. "Dale," he said, his French accent thick with concern. "I have just read this horrifying article. Tell me it is not true." I took a breath. "I am sorry to say, Jean-Luc, that everything in that article is true." There was a long pause. I heard him sigh, a sound of deep disappointment. "This is not the company of Arthur Gable. This is not the company we chose to partner with. The trust is broken." He paused again. "Dale, what are you doing now?" "I am starting my own firm," I said, my voice steady. "Gable Press Strategies, focusing on the principles that we built our relationship on: quality, trust, and partnership." "Good," he said, a note of decision in his voice. "My assistant will be in touch with your lawyer. We will be moving our business. It is you we trust, Dale, not that shell of a company." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. This was it. This was the silent takeover. It wasn't about stealing a client. It was about a client choosing to follow the value. Trent and his ninjas thought the client relationship was owned by Omnicorp. They thought it was a line in a CRM database. They didn't understand that a relationship is a living thing, built between people, not corporations. The stock, which had opened down 15% based on the article alone, started to plummet. News of my phone call with Jean-Luc wouldn't be public yet, but the panic was spreading. The market abhors uncertainty, and Clara's article had painted a picture of a company with no moral or operational compass. Marcus was feeding me updates. The CEO, a man named Peterson, who usually floated above the fray in the C-suite, was on the floor. He was yelling. Trent was pale, his usual cocksure swagger gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered rat. They were in full-blown crisis mode, but they were trying to fix a problem they didn't even understand. They thought it was a PR problem. It was a competence problem, and the source of that competence was sitting in his dining room, drinking coffee. The exodus was not a flood but a steady, deliberate stream. It started with the talent. By midday, Marcus had tendered his resignation. He didn't make a scene. He simply emailed his notice to HR and Trent, citing the New York Times article and a fundamental disagreement with the company's ethical and operational direction. He then forwarded the email to me with a simple message: "I'm with you. Let me know when we start." By the end of the day, 3 of the top 5 production specialists had followed him. These weren't the loud, high-fiving ninjas on the sales floor. These were the quiet, essential people who made the whole machine work. The ones who knew how to balance the ink, who could spot a flaw in a paper shipment from 10 feet away. They were the company's institutional memory, its muscle and bone, and they were walking out the door. Competence isn't cheap, until you lose it all at once. The most gratifying message came late in the afternoon. It was an email from Sarah, the young project manager who had been driven out months earlier. The subject line was just one word: "Thank you." The body of the email was short and powerful. "Dale, I just read the article." I cried, but for the first time in a long time they were good tears. "Thank you for telling the truth. If you have room for a project manager at Gable Press Strategies, I want to be the first in line." The clients followed the talent. Jean-Luc's company was the first major domino. The second was a high-fashion house whose creative director called me personally, furious that Omnicorp had planned to sabotage her designs with cheap materials. By the time the market closed, Omnicorp's stock was down over 40%. They had lost in a single day hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization, all because they thought a 58-year-old man was an expense they could cut. That evening, the desperate counterattack I had been expecting finally came. My phone rang with a number I recognized, Trent's mobile. I let it ring for a moment, then answered and put it on speaker. Clara sat across from me, listening. "Dale." His voice was strained, a desperate, wheedling tone that was a pathetic imitation of his usual arrogance. "Dale, thank God. Listen, this has all been a massive misunderstanding, a complete and total miscommunication." I said nothing. I just let him talk, his panic filling the silence. "We can fix this, Dale. We can walk this back. Peterson, the CEO, he's authorized me to make you an offer. Your job back, of course, and a promotion, executive vice president, a 20% raise, a seat on the strategic oversight committee, whatever you want. We just need you to put out a statement," say the reporter. "Your sister, for God's sake, how could you?" Took your words out of context. "Say we've addressed your concerns. We can weather this, but you have to help us." I listened to him, to the raw, naked desperation in his voice. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. He thought this was about a title. He thought my loyalty, my integrity had a price tag. He was a man who only understood transactions, so he couldn't comprehend an action based on principle. "There's nothing to walk back, Trent," I said, my voice calm and even. "The truth doesn't have a price. You and Peterson, you didn't just fire an employee. You showed the world what you value, and what you value is a lie. You built a house of cards on a foundation of disrespect. You can't be surprised when it collapses. But we're offering you everything," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Everything you wanted." "I never wanted a title, Trent. I wanted to work at a company I could be proud of. You took that away. You can't buy it back." I hung up the phone. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Checkmate," she said. The final confrontation wasn't with Trent or even with the CEO, Peterson. My fight wasn't with them as individuals. It was with the culture they represented, the hollow, spreadsheet-driven philosophy that had corrupted a place I once loved. The real vindication came not from a heated exchange but from the cold, impartial judgment of the market and the board. 2 days after the article dropped, Omnicorp held an emergency board meeting. The news came via a press release, a sterile corporate document that nonetheless felt like a thunderclap. Peterson, the CEO, had resigned to pursue other opportunities, the same empty phrase they had used for me. Trent was gone too, fired for gross mismanagement and conduct detrimental to the company. The board, in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding, announced they were bringing in an outside crisis management team and launching a full-scale cultural and operational review. They were trying to fix the engine after driving the car off a cliff. I read the news on my laptop sitting in my newly leased office space. It was a modest place, clean and full of light, a world away from the glass and steel arrogance of the Omnicorp tower. There was no surge of triumph, no desire to gloat. There was only a quiet, profound sense of rightness, of balance being restored to the universe. It was the feeling a craftsman gets when a joint fits perfectly, when the final piece slides into place. They weren't defeated by me. They were defeated by their own incompetence. They had mistaken the map for the territory, and when the terrain got rough, they discovered they had no idea how to navigate it. My only role had been to provide the light, and let everyone else see the truth. A few months passed, the world of Omnicorp faded into the background, a distant storm that had passed. They were eventually acquired for pennies on the dollar by a competitor, their brand so toxic it was effectively worthless. Their name was scrubbed from the building, their ninjas scattered to the wind. My world, on the other hand, was being built, brick by brick. Gable Press Strategies was thriving. My office wasn't a throne, but a workshop. Marcus was my partner, running the production side with the quiet authority he'd always had. Sarah was our head of client strategy, and she was extraordinary, brimming with ideas and a newfound confidence that was a joy to watch. We had a small, hand-picked team of the best people who had left Omnicorp, and a growing roster of clients who had come to us not because we were cheap, but because we were good. Our biggest client was John Luke's watch company. One afternoon he came to visit the new office. We walked him through our current project for him, a limited edition book celebrating the company's centennial. Sarah presented the strategy. Marcus showed him the paper and ink prototypes. The atmosphere was one of quiet collaboration, of mutual respect. At the end of the meeting, John Luke put a hand on my shoulder. "This," he said, looking around the room at my small, focused team, "this is what we were buying all along. It was never the building or the logo. It was this. It was the people." After he left, I stood by the window, looking out at the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the buildings. In my old office, I had a better view, a higher floor. But I had never felt as tall as I did in that moment. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my own worth. I had proven that a culture of respect isn't a soft benefit, it's the single most critical asset a company has, and I had built a new home for it. The new reality wasn't a victory, it was a beginning. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out my home office and I came across the cardboard box from that last day at Omnicorp. I hadn't opened it since I'd placed it in my basement workshop. Inside, beneath some old photos, was my employee ID card. Dale Miller, head of client strategy, employee since 1996. The face staring back at me was younger, of course, but the eyes were more tired than they are today. It was the face of a man who was carrying the weight of a slow-motion betrayal and didn't even know it. I looked at the card for a long moment. It felt like an artifact from another man's life, a relic of a time when I let a company's logo define my value. I didn't rip it up. I didn't burn it. That would have given it too much power. I simply dropped it into the bottom drawer of my desk and closed it. A quiet closing of a long chapter. My identity is no longer on a plastic card. It's in the trust of my clients. It's in the respect of my colleagues. It's in the quality of the work we do every single day. So here's the moral of the story, the reason I wanted to tell you all this. Companies are not your family. A job is not your identity. Loyalty, respect, and dignity are not one-way streets. For years I believed that my quiet competence was enough, that my work would speak for itself. I was wrong. In today's corporate world, which too often values noise over substance, you have to be the guardian of your own worth. You have to document your value, protect your reputation, and understand that the relationships you build with people, with colleagues and clients, are the only assets that are truly yours. They can't be downsized, restructured, or written off in a quarterly report. They thought I was just a line item on a spreadsheet, an aging asset to be disposed of. They forgot that the foundations of the entire building were resting on that asset. They thought process was a substitute for people, and they learned the hard way that a recipe is useless without a chef. So if you're in that place right now, that place where you feel overlooked, underestimated, or erased, remember this: your experience is not a liability, it's your leverage. Your integrity is not a weakness, it's your armor. Don't wait for them to recognize your value. Recognize it yourself, and be prepared to prove it. The best revenge isn't a loud explosion, it's the quiet, undeniable success of building something better on the ashes of what they tried to burn down. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll like this video, leave a comment and let me know about your own experiences, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and please, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for more stories about getting what you deserve. Until next time, know your worth.